Whoops.
Oh,
Yeah.
there we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me just give a brief introduction here. Just say, uh, this is Brent Rains for Alternate Perceptions Online Magazine. And this is April 26, 2023. And I'm interviewing Thomas M. Ferrario, the director of the Ted Phillips Marley Woods Research Center out in Missouri. And we're going to be talking some very interesting things. And he's going to begin by just explaining about how this all came about and how he, about Ted Phillips and his work, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would just say that Ted Phillips was such a multifaceted, wonderful man. He was a true scientist. He worked with Dr. Alan Hynek, of course, for many years, and worked at the time. And unfortunately, Ted was born in 1942, and we lost Ted in 20. So it was such a great loss, and I still can't believe the man's gone. But he fell into a place called Marley Woods, a state director for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network in Herman, in Missouri, I should say. Bruce Whitteman, which we just lost this year. He was a great friend of mine and one of the first MUFON state directors, and started with Walt Andrus and John Schuessler, the founders of MUFON. But he had gotten reports from a ranch out there in Missouri that was looking for answers, had a lot of high strangeness that paralleled and equaled the Skinwalker Ranch in so many ways. And at the time, Ted Phillips wasn't working with MUFON. And as a personal favor, Bruce Whitteman asked him if he'd investigate it. And so he did go out and investigate it. And he was just blown away. As Ted said, all his life he was chasing breadcrumbs of UFOs. He did the hard science, nuts and bolts work. He went out with compaction meters, estimated these things at 10 to 20 tons, put down on each pad. But it was the first time he ever experienced anything himself. So when he got out and met the ranchers, he literally devoted the rest of his life to investigating Marley Woods. And I will say it's two ranches, one made up of 1,200 acres, one is about 750 acres. It's about 2 miles north and south and 3 miles east and west. So you can see it's a good piece of real estate our small team had to work on. But it was, and I got hooked up with Ted through MUFON. I was assistant state director at the time. And from the first day I heard one of Ted's lectures, I was blown away, and I offered him my assistance. And I'm an electrician by trade, electrical engineer for a powerboat company. I was. Ted said, well, let's see what you got, Tom. And I went out with him. And over the years, from 2000 on till just a couple years ago, we became close friends and worked together. And we had 3 other team members out there at the ranch at times. And but it was just a learning experience. And I will tell you, he was one of the greatest people you could ever wanted to work with.
Well, I always knew him based, his extensive research into the landings, and there were hundreds and hundreds that he documented. He'd visit the landing sites, and I know in the lecture that I listened to where he's speaking, I think at the 2009 Ozark UFO conference in Arkansas, that he was telling that for years he was getting there, to a site a few weeks after it had occurred, and with Marley Woods, suddenly he was it changed everything. He was right there at ground zero when it happened, and could observe things. I remember he said that he went from the nuts and bolts guy to, I said, I guess you could simply call me the nuts guy because it's so high strange,
Yes.
And you were right there along with others to observe what he was observing. I know he brought you up to the microphone a number of times to share what was observed. I know the aspect there of the directional quality of what was observed, like how you and Ted had come up with your car headlights to observe up closer to a light you'd been seeing from on this hillside, and the owner was on the other side of you guys, and he could see your headlights, but you guys couldn't see the mystery light or whatever category it was, but he could see the light and you couldn't. So that indicated, and I've been hearing about that type of phenomena from other reports. So that was quite interesting. I mean, it's
Exactly. Yes, it
yeah.
was. And we learned an important fact from that incident, that the phenomena at times can be very directional, as you so often hear in ufology. Uh,
Mhm.
like you stated, we were right at that location. We could see no artifact of that, and yet the ranch owner at Site One viewed the object. It never terminated. It was right alongside us. And as you said, I backed that, actually started backing my vehicle up, and he seen my backup lights and brake lights. And he said, "Well, you're right next to it." And we said, "We can see nothing." So how do you explain that? Except as we have
Yeah.
actually proved in many ways, that it is dimensional and directional, and it's high strangeness that I will tell you that whenever you think you've seen it all, experienced it all, it always throw a new wrinkle in. So
Well, one of the strangest stories I ever heard was up near Chicago, and this lady who'd had a number of experiences had guests in her home who were also experiences. It was kind of a support setting, and the meeting had just ended, and there was her and two of her attendees, a man and a woman, and she said she was just talking with them, facing them, and suddenly they were like had this surprised look on their face, and she followed their gaze and couldn't see anything, but they said that for a few seconds they were seeing like a portal opened up, a doorway with a hooded figure standing in there, and she was looking in the same direction they were and couldn't see a thing, but it was all the perspective. And I'm from Maine originally. I've lived in Tennessee since I came down here and married a local lady, and since '77. But up in Maine, this man and his mother told me of seeing these balls of light
yes.
around their property. And there was one time that he said he was just a young boy at the time, but said that he and his mother and I think maybe one or two others were standing on their property and looked out into a field, and there was a man with his horse and a two-row cultivator going back and forth, and there was this light just positioned right near the ground. And finally they came to the row where this light was. It shrunk down. The cultivator went right over it. The horse never reacted. They could see it, and they could see the ball rolling around on the ground. It kind of shrunk down, and it went over it, and it had no reaction. And then after it passed, the ball grew back in a larger size again. And he said, "Now I don't associate that with UFOs. That was a paranormal thing. But where do you draw the
Well,
line?
I will tell you something that is a sore subject for a lot of ufologists to this day, and it would have been for me in my early days, and it was
Mhm.
for Ted. But we've come to the realization that the paranormal UFOs, we believe it's all interdimensional, and we proved it at Marley, as they're proving at Skinwalker. And I'll tell you, people, I was so fortunate through Ted. We had people out in Marley, Jacques Vallée had worked with Ted with Hynek, and Jacques Vallée came out and spent time with us. Douglas Trumbull, the one that did the special effects, and Close Encounters and that,
Yeah. Mhm.
he was building some pretty sophisticated camera equipment he brought out to Marley. And I will tell you that the one thing that we did prove without a doubt is everything was dimensionally based and frequency driven. And just virtually what that means is that this stuff has the ability to come open up a portal, come through whenever it wishes, and return. And we did have two portals that were in a regular location that we filmed, and Ted took some astounding photographs of it. And I'll just throw out there, if you want to see any of this material,
Mhm.
just go to YouTube and put my name in there, Ferrario, and I have like 30 little short movies. I have on the history of Ted Phillips, his beginning, actual film footage of light balls and occurrences in Marley. So you can go there and see the real thing anytime you'd like for free. So, but we did have, working with people like Jacques Vallée and Douglas Trumbull. At times they were both out there together with us and other people.
Yeah.
That it was just, and I can say now, for a long time we couldn't speak about it, but we had a connection. We worked with Robert Bigelow come out and spend time at Marley, and we were actually going to spend time at Skinwalker, and it just never worked out. But and I am friends. We were planning on doing a show at Marley, and a sequel or a spinoff, actually, of Skinwalker. I know the producers that produced Skinwalker, and they're great people. And but some occurrences happened, and we did film one show with Ben Hansen. I'm sure you're familiar with UFO Witness, and Nordics in the Cube. We did film. Actually, we had 3 shows filmed. Their show was, they pulled it after this year, and it won't be up. But we did have a little one show that we're in, Nordics in the Cube, and you can go there and watch everything you'll see in that with Ben and Melissa Tittle that happened that night. Actually happened. It's all real, and we had some pretty incredible events that we documented and filmed out there with them. So
Okay, we'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and did Jacques Vallée have any experiences himself while he was visiting?
Yes, he did. I will tell you that he's seen a lot of. We actually seen the portal one night, and he experienced some light ball activity. And then again, Douglas, we had a phenomenon out there, more of a, I guess you'd call it poltergeist activity. And here again, the paranormal comes into play. But along with the 2-story building the property owner built, Ted and us, there was an old log cabin out there that had a lot of occurrences. And this is an experiment they did actually out at Skinwalker, and Bigelow's people did there. And Douglas had high-speed camera. We did this experiment, but the poltergeist activity in the cabin was such that if you would put your car keys down, or a deck of playing cards, or just the most mundane objects, they would disappear from one location and reappear in another. And they actually set up a high-speed camera on this tabletop, and this camera was well able to catch a projectile, a bullet in flight. It was at high speed, but yet it would not catch the movement of these objects on the tabletop. They would just dematerialize and rematerialize in another location. And according to Jock and other people, the only way this makes any sense is the dimensional aspect of this, that this thing is jumping in and out dimensionally. And that comes into play in the paranormal, as you're aware of so often. Things disappear and come up or in another location. So
wow. And I remember there was in the video where Ted Phillips was talking, I think back in 2009 at this conference. He was talking about these 10-foot circles and the reaction of cattle and horses, and I thought, my God, I've been talking with people recently regarding animal mutilations and things, but those events and the fact that the guy that was almost thrown off his horse, and he goes down looking for a snake, and then there's 2 of these 10-foot circles where they're burned into the ground, and the horse is reacting to them as did cattle and other events, I think on the same ranch. And it's like, what the heck? And then what happened to his horse later, where it broke through a steel gate, and ended up crashing into the barn door and going into the barn and was burned, and parts of it flesh. I don't know if the horse survived that or not, but it was a prize horse that the guy had, and he'd seen all these reactions of cattle and things. So, uh, were you involved in that yourself, Case?
Yeah,
Or,
we were
uh,
involved. We wanted a presence out there around, that we'd be long term, but we only were able to manage our team all through the year, several months. We'd be out there, but the incident, the horse mutilation in the barn was a very traumatic and graphic thing that happened to the rancher. He went down, he checked his horse in the morning, it gave it sugar like he so often did. He ran the fence line, was within sight of the barn the whole time. Uh,
mhm.
20 minutes later, he comes back and he noticed the gate was ajar and he knew that wasn't right. He goes in the barn and he described it like a slaughterhouse. He said, the horse pieces hanging from the rafter, blood all over. And when we got out there to examine it and take samples, they had removed all the large pieces of the horse. There was still blood everywhere in there, and a few samples of the flesh. We took those, and no Phyllis Budinger, which was Ted's go-to person for all the science work. Her lab checked it, no explosives, nothing out of the net, and Ted explained it as from his experiences going overseas for Alan. He'd seen it something like that before, and he said it was as if the horse had been put in a microwave oven and exploded. And
Wow.
but it was, and for what reason, and why? Except we believe that it generated fear, and so often, and they're finding out at Skinwalker now, fear is a tool that is used by this intelligence, and it works. Believe me.
Wow. And it's interesting that it seems to this thing seems to work on like cattle, animals, and not that humans haven't been attacked, but it hasn't done it to the same degree or level. It seems um, that it happens with these other. Um,
Well, we have had experiences. Unfortunately, we have had ranchers out there have had exposure to this, and we actually, as they're so there again, the parallel to Skinwalker, uh, like the 1.6 gigahertz, signal for communication and microwave. But we actually believe most of the harm in the bad guy in Marley, the same as Skinwalker, is microwave radiation. And we had team members, myself included. Ted was injured by microwave one night, him and I, in a vehicle. And, we were coming back from site 2 to site 1. And I hate to draw the analogy to Close Encounters, but a beam of light hit our car. It lit up with the whitest, purest light intensity. You couldn't even, I remember looking down the vents in the dash.
mhm.
And Ted and I, probably not so wisely, we both jumped out and looked at this, and we seen the beam retract. And as Ted said, it retracted into a pinpoint like an old reflex camera lens. It just twisted into a pinpoint and was gone. Now, we seen no structured vehicle. I wish we had, but nothing.
Hmm.
We got back to site 1. Ted got out, got his gear out, dropped his gear, went over to the building, and actually got sick, vomited. And in hindsight, I wish that had happened to me. And as Ted so often told me, he said, anything you talk about, Tom, you got to make sure you document it 2 or 3 ways. And I have medical documentation of this, but after we went back that week, I started getting burning on my scalp and went to my local doctor, and he thought it was shingles. It wasn't. They tested. And I was actually under opiates. My hurt so bad. In the span of about a month, my hair went from dark brown to the color you see it is today.
Hmm.
Now, had that been the extent of it, I would have been happy. But then the next year, couple years, I started having vision problems, and I went to the doctor, and they sent me into St. Louis, Missouri, to a specialist. I had something called macular cyst and cataracts. And of course, the eye is the most sensitive organ in the body to microwave radiation. And I asked him what caused the macular cyst, which is when you can have an extremely good outcome when they do surgery, or you can lose vision. And I had a good outcome. And I asked them what caused that. And they said, well, they really don't know. It usually age. At the time, I wasn't that old. But when I went back for the follow-up and they took the bubble off my eye and to let me go and test my eye, everything was good. And I'm so thankful. In passing, I asked this young doctor, I said, I wished I could put a finger on what caused this. And he said, well, the only time I've ever seen this in a younger person is we had some cell tower workers in here, and one of the cell tower worker was up working on a cell tower, and they fired us up. And he said they forgot he was up there, and he had macular cyst from the microwave energy. So that confirmed. And I will just throw in, as you're seeing on Skinwalker, they're getting damage. Some of the personnel out there have had damage, and from microwave and energy spectrum. So it's real and it does happen. And, for a long time, we didn't talk about it because Ted thought it would take the focus off his work. And Ted, being a scientific man, the science is where he wanted to be, and he didn't want to take the direction off of that. So,
I think Dr. Hynek was confronted different times with that similar perspective. And I remember there was you mentioned about a person who had seen this light, and in the light he could see like another landscape, like there was like it was a portal, like there was trees and blue sky with clouds in it. And apparently that was on more than one occasion. And it kind of reminded me of a contact experiencer we had here in Tennessee back in the 70s, who said that I think it was the same field he would go hunting in, and he claimed a ship came down and a Bigfoot came out of the UFO and then went back in. And at one time he said he saw this like a portal, and I think it was winter, and where this was, it was a different season, but it was like a landscape of, another dimension, like. And, I had never heard really much of anyone else saying that, but I noticed that it came out in Ted Phillips when he was telling about some of the phenomena. And that was, pretty interesting. I've not always known what to think of the guy's experiences, because they got pretty wild. But, you can't dismiss them either,
Well, I'll tell you, the cryptid experiences we had out in Marley, we had our share. The only Bigfoot sighting was right near the property boundary at Marley. And, we've had what we call the white. Ted lectured about several times about the white, and this sounds so strange, but it was like a polar bear / sloth type of huge creature, weighed approximately 450 or more pounds, left tracks. We got out there, we found hair samples on a 4-strand barbed wire fence. We found 16-inch long white hairs. We found tracks, we took cast. Ted sent in the 16-inch long hairs for analysis. They came back, they did microscopy on them. And actually, we didn't have the money at the time for DNA, and the DNA work back then was crude, but it was so interested, some of the people that worked at the lab, that they did some crude DNA work, and basically they came back with microscopy and DNA work that it was no known match. So how do you explain that?
I don't know. Do you still have some hair samples left from those days? Or
we still have. Ted still kept. He filed all that stuff. I'll tell you. I actually, one of the hardest things for me was to go in his office in his facility after he passed, and I was helping his wife clean up some things and document some things that we were trying to do a book on him. And Ben Hansen was out there and looked at everything. We showed him that. But Ted, I don't know if you're aware of the case, the Delphos, Kansas case with Ron Johnson, where the craft came down and left a white ring on the
Yeah.
ground.
Yeah,
And
that was from 73 or so. Or
yeah, in
the early one.
Delphos, Kansas. And Ted still had several pounds of soil from that case. And I actually, when I was in his office, I couldn't resist it. I had to actually handle it and do an experiment because it was hydrophobic initially. The soil, when Ted first examined it, it was hydrophobic. It wouldn't absorb water, and nothing would grow in the ring. And I actually did an experiment. To this day, that soil remains that characteristic. You can pour water on it, and it will not absorb water. It just beads off it. And a sample, control sample from near that ring goes to mud, the minute you expose it to water. So after all these years, it's still hydrophobic. And but Ted kept everything like that.
Wow.
For further analysis.
Yeah.
But
Wow. That's that wild. And with the some of this, it just the Skinwalker Ranch with Marley Woods. There was a time that John Keel would try to present some of these things about, he called it the reflective factor. They've been calling it lately the hitchhiker effect.
yes.
And all these paranormal elements, poltergeist manifestations. But we really coming around to seeing that, yeah, they're admitting there is some really high, strange events involved in all this. And have you found anything like around these areas, Indian mound sites or anything? Anything like
That was one of the things that it drove Ted crazy. He was always trying to find out what set this area apart from any other. He looked in the topography, the minerals. He even got with the state of Missouri, and there's no Native American encampments or involvement that much there ever that they could find.
No.
This all goes back, though, several generations as far practically as recorded history in the area. So it's always been there. We have found caves in adjoining pieces of property, but none under Marley. But we do feel that in one cave complex we found it could extend under Marley, but Ted could never find any reason that set this apart from any other area.
Yeah.
So that drove him crazy.
Did the activity ever seem to follow, like seismic activity, earthquakes, or moon phases, or anything that he noticed? Or
There had been reports of rumblings, like in sonic boom type activity, sounding like sonic booms, and the ground shaking in actually from the sound, but nothing that was a normal activity. And so much in Marley was what we call one-timers, that you never knew what you'd expect, and you may see something, observe something, and never see it again. We had an aspect, we had what Ted called the unseen force. Now, I've seen that a lot at the new Skinwalker people, that they're dealing with this, but we had a force out there that would knock down steel gates that were log chained to oak posts, not put a scratch on the fence, but knock these things flat on the ground, take trees and like they were in a vortex and just about twist the limbs off the tree, and no wind around. So we called it the unseen force. And but we had it all out there. We had the most skinwalkish type anomalies. We had hooded figures seen out there by the caretaker and the property owner going down the road, a series of hooded figures. And it gets us strange. the caretaker yelled at this one on the end and finally got it to turn. And Ted worked almost 2 weeks trying to get the caretaker to tell him what he's seen. And finally, he didn't even want to tell Ted. And he said that the one on the end, when it turned to him, he said he described it. It had like a lone wolf face. Now, that directly reflects Skinwalker. So they've had activity like that out there, I will tell you.
You
And
say like a wolf type face, or?
yeah, it was like a long wolf type face when this hooded figure turned and looked at the caretaker.
Wow.
I mean, and he didn't even want to speak about this. So, I mean, we've had agriglyphs, or what Ted he liked to deem them agriglyphs or saucer nests. He didn't like the terminology crop circles because we never had found one in conjunction with a disc. But we had structured craft. We had discs spotted out there. We had 300-foot black cylindrical objects hovering over the road out there at night with a row of yellow windows, no sound, no noise. I mean, like I said, we had all kind of cryptids. And then the dimensional aspect, again, we had, one time the rancher brought us out there and it was a light snow on top of just a real light skim of ice on the pond. And the rancher noticed something out there and called our attention to it. And here you had a row of 13-inch wide, 3-toed tracks that started out from the bank and went out and terminated in the middle of the pond. I mean, they were just like a line, and they ended in one direction. And the rancher actually stepped on the edge of the ice and broke through. So you're talking about a 13-inch track. That's a considerable amount of mass and weight.
Yeah.
So when we ran this past, the numbers past the people that knew, they said, again, there's a dimensional aspect, that this thing was in the process of going interdimensional, and that explains why it didn't break through the ice. But it had enough mass left to make a track, a 13-inch wide track on the ice and snow. So
Wow.
how do you explain that? I mean, but it's real and it's there.
Yeah. And there was one rancher, I believe it was the same one with the prized horse, that or maybe it was a different one, but anyway, described where he would have a cow or maybe a calf and come back the next day and it would just be bones. I mean, there wouldn't be any flesh left at all.
Yeah. He one particular incident, he lost, I think it was 5 calves in one night. And some of them were in that state. I mean, and a lot of them just a typical cattle mutilation, defleshed face, no predation, nothing would touch these animals. And the man actually had a pile of bones behind one barn that was just enormous from over the years from doing this. And and we've had deer, a lineman out there found 13 deer on top of a ridge at Marley. The vet looked at them, there's no lightning, no poison. He couldn't even determine what killed these deer, but they were all laid down, and I'll probably get in trouble if I say this with people that do cattle mutilations, because it's an unknown fact when they do cattle mutilation. But there is an occurrence that a lot of times when they find cattle or deer, they'll all be pointed in one direction when they're laid over. So sometimes east, sometimes north. Now that's a little known fact. But there again, what does this to an animal? A healthy animal, and you can just see there's no damage to the animal. It hasn't gone through any pain, or you can tell it's just laid over like it went to sleep. And
but with some of them, correct me if I'm wrong, but with some of them, there was actually just nothing but bones. There was no flesh left, no blood or anything, right?
Yeah, and some are defleshed. There again, sexual organs taken in precise cuts, like a laser scalpel, which we have now. But at the time, a lot of this was done. There were no laser scalpel, excuse me,
Yeah.
scalpels that we had. So, you know,
What
it's
about
there and
those?
it's real.
What about the helicopters? You know, some people have reported a lot of helicopter activity around the mute sites. So,
It's, you know, that's something, Ted, everybody's asked us if we had government involvement in that way. And we really can't say that we ever had any government involvement, helicopters or
mhm,
planes, or we could tell of no, you know, connection between that at all in our instance.
okay.
I know it does happen, but no, we were just on our own.
Wow. Um, how about the zone of fear? You know, like I know Keel said he was in a site in West Virginia where suddenly he could, you know, he felt this fear, intense fear, and he could step back and he would be out of it and move forward. And it was like some frequency causing it. And I recently talked to someone else that told me they had experienced that at another site. I wondered if maybe you guys might have encountered that sort of a phenomena, or I know you mentioned like there was an energy that had force and could
It
knock things over, bust through gates or whatever.
Yeah, you know, it when I first started out there, Ted told me about an occurrence, and at the time he told me, I didn't really put much into it, but about on my third visit, I experienced it myself. We never experienced really fear ourselves, except what was
Mhm.
done to animals in that manner. But there was an occurrence I when we were sleeping in one night, which was very rare, but and unlike most people don't know this either, but the bewitching hour in ufology and paranormal now is not really midnight. It tends to be 3 a.m. when things happen. And you'll hear that a lot when
Yeah.
things are logged or written down. But one morning I was woke up and I was actually at 3 a.m. I was shaken, and we part of our structure on the second floor was where we slept and Ted's office was. And something shook me, woke me up, and I woke up and I had just the most overwhelming sense of euphoria. I felt like I was going to go out on the deck and see the mothership. I just felt that I can't explain it. And I went out on the deck. Of course, I didn't see anything. Now, that's not to say there wasn't anything there, but
Yeah.
my euphoria went to depression and just so deep. And I went back in the office and I woke Ted, which is something you really didn't want to really didn't want to do. Uh, but I said, Ted, I said, this, you were right, this thing, because it had happened to him. I said, it woke me. I know it shook me, and it was there. And Ted just looked at me, and he, just as Ted Phillips, he had a dry sense of humor, as you know,
Mhm.
if you watch any lectures of his. He
Yeah.
told me, he said, well, Tom, he said, welcome to Marley Woods. And he went back to sleep.
So it physically shook you,
Yeah.
uh, but you
Yeah.
didn't see anything. Um, was it like could you feel like a hand or anything, or you just
I
felt?
just remember it just shook me. Something physically shook me in the bed.
Mhm.
And I woke up and it's hard to explain it, but I just had this overwhelming state of euphoria, just a joy. I mean, I felt like I'm finally going to get to the bottom of this. I thought I was going to go on the deck. I thought the mothership was going to be out there, you know,
Yeah.
and nothing. Now, like I say, that doesn't mean there wasn't anything there, uh, just because I couldn't see it. But it just went from that to depression in such a short instant that it was unnatural. And
Right.
but Ted experienced that, and others had experienced that out there.
Wow. Mm-mm. Strange.
It is. It
Very
truly
strange.
is. And
Ah.
just when I thought we'd seen it all, you know, there'd be some other twist in something, and uh, it just, you know, and we've had an abduction out there at one time. We believe the only known abduction in Marley years and years ago. There was a child that was abducted. Uh, and I'll just do a brief synopsis of the story, but it was a young child that was a special needs child, and the mother and father, it was in the fall, and there was a light snow on the ground, and the child, they were going to fix his favorite breakfast for him, and which was pancakes. And the child, they started fixing breakfast, and the child had a habit, he'd run outside, and even in the wintertime, this child would run out barefoot. And but anyway, he runs out the door. Mom and dad, they fix the breakfast, and they call for him. Can't find the child. And because of his nature of the child's special needs, they actually got the police involved. They were scared to death that he got somehow to the pond. Maybe he got in the pond and drowned or froze. And but the unique thing was his tracks there again went out at the front of the house on the sidewalk and terminated, just ended his barefoot tracks. Now, the rest of the story to this is about 2 weeks later, I believe it was 2 weeks, mom and dad's in the kitchen and they're still not over this, of course, and there's a knock on the door and they go open the door and here's the child coming up to the door, runs in and wants to know where breakfast is. There's no no frostbite.
Wow.
The kid looks like the day he left. So how do you explain that? It was as if to this child, he had been out there 5-10 minutes and came back. In reality, in their timeline, it was a couple weeks. So,
Wow.
There again, we believe it was a dimensional aspect of this, that he either got slipped into a portal or something. But he had no story, he had nothing to say about his experience. He had none as far as just coming back. So,
wow. Do you remember what year that was, or
that would have probably been back in the 60s, late 60s, 70s.
Okay.
So,
wow.
Ted had over 225 witnesses in the Marley Woods area around there that he had taken their story. And these are people that, believe me, they wouldn't even want to talk to some of their own family members about this. They didn't want it made known to the public. So for what reason, how could this benefit them to make up a story like this? There was no reason for it, but yet the more Ted gained these people's trust, and that's one of the reasons why I know people hated us, but we never would divulge the location or the names of a lot of the people involved. Ted felt he owed it to those people, and I maintain that to this day. And a lot of the people are gone now. And just even, I will tell you, it's so sad. When we did the show with Ben Hansen and Melissa Tittle out there, we had a great time, and a lot of things happened out there if you watch that episode, but we were planning on doing more, and I was in contact with one of the producers on Skinwalker. We're going to do a spinoff, and I get a call 2 weeks after we filmed the show that the property owner on Site 2, he had a stroke and passed away out there. So that kind of terminated on Site 2, and I got with Site 1, and those people wanted to do something at first, and I have my own ideas what happened, but 2 weeks before we were due to go out and start the spinoff, the property owner called me and told me he talked to the family and some things that happened out there. And the family just thought it was best that he said, I hate to do this to you, Tom, but it's all off. We're not going to do anything out here, but you and the rest of the team can come out here, but I don't want any more strangers out here. So you can imagine the situation that put me in 2 weeks before we were going to go out and start shooting. I'll just say they weren't happy about the situation.
Wow. Yeah, it's I've been involved myself in ufology 56 years, and
Wow.
There's so many people that I knew that have passed, and whatever
Oh,
information I can share with people about their experiences, because they're not here anymore to tell it
yeah.
themselves, and all I
Yeah.
might have is some letters or recording, tape recording, or something to bring
Yeah.
back those stories, and it makes me realize, in fact, there was someone that just passed away locally here, and I was telling my wife, I says, I ought to, he's got a lot of stories of ghosts and strange things, and I said I ought to go by, and I've talked with him before. We'd see him at the grocery store. I ought to come by and get his stories, and come find out it was already too late. He just passed away, and we just attended his funeral yesterday. So
Oh,
things happen,
oh,
um, you think you got plenty of time, and
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but
And Stan Freeman was a close friend of Ted's, and we were going to be working with him, and then Stan passed away, and that's the worst thing about getting older. I've been losing too many friends and acquaintance, uh, just
mhm.
right and left, and but yeah, but I grew up too, like you, in a rural area, and I had my own experience, some of my family, and I got to be in a rural community. People, again, won't talk about it much, unless they trust you. And I got to be the go-to guy that they'd like to go talk to, and I'd investigate stories. And then I got hooked up with Walt Andrus on a Sunday morning. I called him, and we talked for about 4 hours, and he made me a section director on the phone, and told me to call Bruce Whitteman in St. Louis, Missouri, which is 100 miles away from my location. And the section director, state director there, Bruce Whitteman, who we just lost, he said, well, first of all, I'm the state director, and you're not even in MUFON. I make the state section director. So you come and visit me, and we'll try to get you some training in that. And he put me with an Air Force captain, and very great gentleman named Jim Cross, Korean airline pilot, fighter pilot. And
Yeah,
but I had so many, everything from abductions to sightings in my rural area, and some of them overlapped. I found out with Walt Andrus that actually a couple cases actually had made it. Blue Book had investigated that I never even knew. So,
well,
but that's how I got hooked up with Mutual UFO Network, and went on with Debbie Ziegelmeyer's the Missouri State Director now, and a board member on MUFON, and her and I started the MUFON dive team years ago, and under John Schuessler sanctioned it, and we actually trained divers to dive on UFO sites. So, and she's done a lot of that. I had some health issues the last 10 years, but she stayed involved in that part. And, but, but she's a great state director now. And, she's like my sister. We call each other sister and brother, uh, but no, it's like when you grow up in that, the reality that gives you a jump, a head start on others. And, of course, when you investigate, you can't ever relate any of your experiences or stories, but it gives you that understanding that it's real, and you never ridicule anybody.
you're right.
Ridicule isn't a scientific process. So
Yeah, I know a lot of people that I've met over the years have you don't find out about it at first, but later on you find out the reason they're in the field to begin with is because they themselves had experiences and they're looking for answers, and so the best way to do that is to become involved as a investigator themselves, and it's quite one of those people I learned a great deal from. I went to talk with her and gather information, and she actually introduced me to Dr. Berthold Schwartz, who was a psychiatrist who got involved in the study of UFOs, and I corresponded with him for about 37 years, right up till he passed.
uh,
And it's he was very aware of the paranormal element. But I would go on investigation with a lady in Florida, and We visited this one woman who'd seen a disc-shaped object about 2 nights in a row around the same time near Jacksonville Naval Air Station. And, she felt like she was being watched. It was really scary to her. She called the police. By the time the police got there, it wasn't there. And it was just her as a single witness. And I remember Ramona asked, have you ever had any other unusual experiences? And her first, no, this is it, And then she said, well, yeah, I did have an experience where I got a phone call once, and it was a friend who had died, and they wanted to come see me. And I started crying. I said, no. And then she started remembering another incident, and it just took a little while for that memory to be, because these things happen. A lot of people kind of repress it, they put it in the back because it's nothing they can share with anybody else who's going to really be open to it. And so that taught me to start looking, when I investigate someone's experience, to kind of feel around the other unusual things, not necessarily just strictly the UFO encounter, but a lot of people, if they investigate a UFO incident, they won't, and they find out a Bigfoot went across their backyard the next day. Well, that's not what I'm looking for. That I'll leave that up to somebody else, that's into that. And no telling how much. I know this guy has a few years ago told me he had 17,000 cases all over the world of UFO occupant incidents. A lot of them were in newspapers and such, and he's collected all this information to study. And I said to him, it'd be interesting if in each of those cases we could get beyond just that one single incident and find out what other things that they may have experienced over a lifetime, because chances are there were a lot of hidden stories, that never came to the light of day. And that's what certainly the experience at Marley Woods are absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
By the way, were you involved, since you were diving? I was recently did an interview with Tommy Roy Bland, International UFO Bureau, back in the 70s. And he said that he and others from that organization were in the area of Missouri around Piedmont, where there was a lot of reports back in 73, and Dr. Harley Rutledge became, involved in the incidents. And he said that he and a friend had seen an object while they were investigating. It seemed to go down in the lake, and they had divers go down and see if they could find anything. So you mentioned doing some diving. I wondered if maybe you might have been one of those people.
Yeah, no, I wasn't in that particular. Now, Debbie Ziegelmeyer, state director, she's had divers down there already on some cases, and we actually we learned so much. We had a quarry in Missouri that we used for our training, and we actually submerged one of the old large satellite dishes, the metal grid, the huge 8-foot dish, and
the old
and
ones,
we actually learned when we put that down there, we had no intention of, or didn't know what we more or less just wanted to replicate the structure, and we found out with compasses that just that large metal structure, we actually it would affect our compass heading in the bottom of that quarry, which was about 48 foot of water, that we could find it with our compass, just it having that metal structure, that mass of metal, would mess up our compass heading. So that taught us a lot right there, that, just the metallic things in the makeup can affect your compass and different, so it doesn't have to be actually activated or powered to mess up or to work on you like that. So, but we actually trained divers in that, and we were going to do some unique things, and we had a lot of people promise funding, and I'll just say that funding in this business is always promised, and then it's usually pulled away. But unfortunately, that's the way the world works, and none of us are independently wealthy, I'll tell you.
Yeah, it's too bad there's not more funding for this kind of work, because certainly have the cases and the sites to dig into.
Yeah.
But anyway, well, I've taken up an hour of your time,
Oh,
and
that's fine.
and
I,
I really appreciate it. And you know, if all goes well, I'm, you know, like maybe call upon you again sometime to go into some more of this fascinating subject. Uh,
yes, it truly is. And Ted being who he was, the reams of people that I met through Ted, there's a gentleman named Ray Stanford, which I don't know if you're familiar with that name at all,
yeah, I
but
am.
he ran Project Starlight for the government and private concerns. And he wrote the book Saucer in the Pentagon Closet, I believe it is.
Hmm.
And we went back to Lonnie Zamora's. Ted wanted to do more work on that in Socorro, New Mexico, and Ted was one involved in that, and Heineck and Ray, and we went back, actually viewed that place, re-examined it, and but Ted was just such a wonderful man, and he was a professional photographer, musician. Uh, he was an engineer by trade. He worked at the White Sands, helped build the White Sands Air Force Base, Minuteman missile project. Uh,
Wow.
it just Ted could do anything.
Well, no wonder he was Dr. Heineck's right hand man there. A lot of this stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
He was Heineck's field man out doing the soil sample compaction test and soil sampling. And on the other hand, you had Jacques Vallée doing the software and the documentation for him on the other. So, I mean, they had a team there that you couldn't beat.
Yeah. And then they dragged you into it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thankfully, I never in a million years expected Ted to take me up on it, but I'm so glad he did. And
Oh man, sounds like it's been a eye-opening adventure.
oh, yes. Yeah.
Uh, but I sure again appreciate you talking with me. It's a fascinating subject.
Well, I
Um,
thank you for the opportunity, and
I'll have this. I'm going to post it to my YouTube page, but it'll be linked in the next issue of Alternate Perceptions on the 1st,
okay.
and it'll be available for free
And
for anyone that wants to listen to us tell these intriguing tales.
and
Uh, but
and
anyway,
I just again I'll throw out there, if anybody wants to see a lot of the history of Ted Phillips, the early beginning, a lot of the photos and
right.
short movies of Marley Woods, just go to YouTube and put my name in there, and it'll come right up. And there's like 30 movies there. A little bit about myself they wanted me to put in there, but a lot about Ted, how he got started, and some great footage in there.
All right, awesome. Well, I certainly appreciate it, and thank you very much. And
Okay.